Cool. I think we shall begin. Welcome, everyone, no matter where you are in the world. Welcome to CRISiSLab webinar. And just now, our core team, we were talking. This is actually our 4th year that we're hosting this CRISiSLab webinar, basically based on the earthquake early warning system development around the world. So that's pretty awesome. Thank you for being with us for this long. And I just noticed that I have a typo on the screen, so please excuse me. So today we're very glad to have Alison Bird, seismologist from Canada, and presenting to us the Canadian earthquake early warning system. So a little bit about Alison. Alison has been working as an earthquake seismologist since 1997, initially for the International Seismological Center in England, and since 2000 with Natural Resource Canada. For 20 years, she has analyzed and researched Western Canada's earthquakes and visited Haida Gwaii as part of the response team after the 2012 magnitude 7.8 earthquake. In recent years, Alison was part of a team developing a comprehensive risk assessment for Canada, and she also routinely responds in the wake of significant events. And so far, she has given over 1,000 interviews. In 2020, she joined the Earthquake Early Warning Project as Liaison and Outreach Officer, helping to establish an earthquake early warning system for Canada. Alison is involved in numerous outreach activities and is passionate about seismic resistant engineering and encouraging mitigation practices for communities that's faced with risks and in educating the public about earthquake hazards. She's on the board of directors for the BC Earthquake Alliance and on the organizing committee for the annual Great British Columbia Shakeout Earthquake Drill. And today she will be focusing on earthquakes in Canada, hazard and risk, and establishing the EEW system in Canada. So I'm Alicia, and I'm the communication person in earthquake in CRISiSLab. And so let's welcome Alison, and later on, after her presentation, Dr. Marian Tian will be facilitating the questions. And meanwhile, feel free to jot down your questions. Cool. I will stop sharing.
Okay, oops, I'm going to start sharing. There we go. Okay, there we go. So, yes, I'm an earthquake seismologist and the Liaison and Outreach Officer for Canada's Earthquake Early Warning System. And I thank you very much for having me today. We have a strong history of earthquakes in Canada through our Indigenous peoples, but also with seismic monitoring since 1898 using initially a Milne seismometer. We now locate roughly 5,000 earthquakes a year in the country. The largest earthquakes do occur along the west coast of British Columbia, where we have most of our tectonic boundaries. But we also have significant earthquakes in Quebec, Ontario, and Yukon Territory, as you can see. So, oops, I should have added some, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but along the west coast of BC is certainly where you get the most dense activity. All these earthquakes help to inform the National Building Code, which is fairly strong. It's similar to the California Code. And you can see that the purple area in southern Vancouver Island, down here is where I am. So I'm in a fairly seismically hazardous region. We have a history of strong damaging earthquakes. The rocks in that lower left picture are from a landslide that occurred during the magnitude 7.8 earthquake on Haida Gwaii in 2012. In terms of the Vancouver Island area, the most recent damaging earthquake was in 1946. There were several large damaging earthquakes in the first half of the 20th century, but it's been relatively quiet since. So unfortunately, that has led people to a false sense of security in the region. In the east, there were also in Saguenay and Charlevoix, Quebec, fairly strong earthquakes in 2025 and 1988. But also a Val-des-Bois earthquake near Ottawa in 2010, which was only a magnitude 5, but it did cause a fair bit of damage to older masonry structures. So earthquake early warning has proven successful in other countries, initially in Japan and Mexico, more recently in Taiwan and California, Oregon, and Washington in the United States along that west coast. The California system started in 2018, just before the ridge crust earthquake sequence, and it performed fairly nicely during that sequence. The system is triggered by the earthquake's P wave, which is that first fairly non-damaging but fast wave, and then the alert is sent out before the more damaging S wave. So the idea is that you're trying to provide seconds to tens of seconds of warning that an earthquake has just been detected and strong shaking is imminent. And even with a few seconds, this can allow protective measures to be taken to reduce the impacts from strong earthquakes. So I just have this little video of how it works. There's a P wave going out, the sensors detecting, quickly being processed in the data center, the alert being sent out. You can see that train stopping before the strong waves come through. So the earthquake early warning system is built up a network of specialized sensors. These are fairly dense network, usually about a 20 kilometer spacing in urban areas. High-speed communications through multiple means so that we're not relying on one mode of communication. In fact, I should add to that, there's also a special fast internet service that's being introduced in British Columbia that was also being used. Multiple data centers, so we have redundancy there. If one goes down, we can still operate. We also have cross-border interoperability. We're using the USGS's Shake Alert software package. We're tweaking it for Canadian use, but it's very, very similar. And this helps with that cross-border data sharing so that we can be really effective at alerting for earthquakes along that border region. Of course, we have cybersecurity. This is necessary. Hackers could really wreak havoc if they hacked into an earthquake early warning system. And we want this to be reliable, particularly under adverse circumstances. So such as when you have a major earthquake, we want to still be able to operate for those aftershocks that could also be damaging. This is a typical situation. We've got two different sensors. We've got Nanometrics Titan SMA and also Garalp's Photomus. So we're using both sensors, different sensors in different locations. But if one sensor has a flaw, the system can still operate with the other sensor. Most stations we try to do indoor installations, as you can see on the left. These are cheaper, easier, more secure, just better all around. However, because of the need to instrument in some fairly remote situations, we do have to have some installations in remote regions and fairly challenging geographies and weathers. So our field crews have been really diligent about getting these in place, and they've been really effective. So this is the network we have. The purple sensors are those that are owned and operated by Natural Resources Canada, which is, of course, a federal department. The yellow sensors are sensors that have been purchased where we funded the purchase and installation for other people to own and operate. So we've got 5 organizations that own and operate these sensor stations. It's hard to see, but there are some under Ottawa, and that's a sort of central part of Eastern Canada. And then the other yellow ones are owned and operated by the Coastal First Nations, Strathcona Regional District, the City of Victoria, and the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So we've got a total of 300 core and 111 extended network stations for over 430 stations overall feeding into this system. The coverage is, of course, concentrated in Western British Columbia, where the bulk of the hazard is, but also in Eastern Ontario and Southern Quebec. And you can see the percent chance of an earthquake early warning alert each year by the colors. I should note the left-hand map has a different scale than the right-hand map. We're far more frequent at alerting in the west than in the east. There's also a challenge in Canada in that the tectonics, the geology are very different in west to east. In Western Canada, it's fairly soft, new crust. So despite the fact that the earthquakes can be very large, the seismic waves do attenuate fairly quickly over distance. Whereas in the east, you're talking about a very hard, old, cold craton. So the seismic waves travel further with greater strength in the east. So the same size earthquake can have a much larger impact area in the east. Also, there's more people and infrastructure at risk in the east, and also the style of architecture in the east is more vulnerable. So even though the earthquakes are smaller in eastern Canada, the overall risk is about the same as west. So the earthquake early warning alerts are going to be sent out based on magnitude, so the size of the earthquake, and intensity, the strength of shaking. We're only going to be alerting for potentially harmful earthquakes. Alerts to the public will be through the National Public Alerting System, which is currently used for severe weather alert, amber alerts, and that sort of thing. The distribution is through cell smartphones, not like those old flip phones like my dad uses, radio and television, and the thresholds are for magnitude 5 and MNI, modified Mercalli intensity of 4. So we're hoping that people will take protective actions when they receive this alert, that they will drop, cover, and hold on. Of course, in other situations, they'll have different actions, but we're trying to build that awareness. So we are trying to develop that culture of awareness around earthquakes and earthquake early warning through collaborations. So provincial emergency management organizations, for example, we funded BC's advertising campaign. You can sort of see that the image from it in the lower right. And they've also incorporated earthquake early warning into their public education materials and activities. And they've been really a great champion for this. Public Safety Canada is also trying to build that awareness across the country. And as mentioned earlier, I'm on the organizing committee for Shakeout BC, and a colleague of mine helps with Grand Secousse, which is the Quebec, Ontario version of the earthquake drill that's held every October. And I know that you do that down in New Zealand as well. And the USGS has been a really great collaborator as well. I should also note that in January, we held a public survey to determine sort of the baseline awareness that people have of earthquakes in their region, how to prepare, how to respond, what they should do if they receive an alert. And this is to sort of create that sort of baseline, and then we expect to hold the survey again after a few alerts have gone out to see if people have built that awareness and if they are responding in the right way. So alerts to technical partners, these will be sent directly through machine-to-machine messaging through an active MQ broker. They will be provide a bit more information than the public alerts, and they will be at slightly lower thresholds, but because they will have that intensity and peak ground motion data, they will be able to decide how to respond to different situations. So they will need to subscribe to our servers, become a technical partner with us. So there's an agreement in place for that. And then they will take the earthquake early warning messages and implement them into their systems, with various software. And we can provide software examples. They can have just the basics, which is the earthquake's time, location, and magnitude, not terribly helpful. But then there's the polygon, which will show them the ground motions in their region, and they can decide what actions they take for different ground motions. And then there's the gridded, which is a bit more accurate. It's a higher resolution version of the ground motions, but this does take a little bit more time. So if they have very time sensitive reactions, they may not want to go for this option. So then they can trigger automated responses, which is a fantastic opportunity. Halting trains, this is something that Japan has done many times and saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives. Even recently, they stopped trains during an earthquake. The tracks were damaged, those trains would have derailed, and they held hundreds, if not thousands of people. So it's a huge opportunity to keep people safe. Having alarms in hospitals to halt surgery and other delicate procedures. These two actions are actually the first ones that Japan instigated when they started their earthquake early warning. Adding the school alarms came later. And then also opening fire hall and ambulance bay doors so that vehicles can still get out and help people. Diverting aircraft from landing on that bumpy moving runway, stopping traffic from going onto bridges and into tunnels, moving elevators to the nearest floor and opening the doors. Numerous people have been trapped in elevators in earthquakes. Securing docks and cranes and other equipment at docks just to keep things safe there. Closing valves, you're protecting your water source, you're protecting the environment from hazardous chemicals. Parking hard drives, so you protect your software and your data. You can be operational once the shaking stops, and then readying the generators to help that. So all these little things that can be done within a short period of time that can dramatically reduce the impact of the earthquake and make you more resilient and able to respond afterward. So we've for years have been providing different products to technical partners, clients, seismic data, automatic notifications. This is a very quick and dirty version of, this is an earthquake's been detected, and then more detailed information about the earthquake. But these are, after the earthquake had occurred. The earthquake early warning should be providing information about the earthquake before the strong shaking arrives, so it can really make a difference. So we have created some technical partner resources that we will be sharing shortly through a web portal, including overview booklets for different critical infrastructure sectors, sort of an overview one-pager, also some testing applications, display packages so they can try the system out before they implement it, and then a template agreement so they know what kind of agreement they will be getting into to become a technical partner. So just a few considerations for everyone. Most alerts should be received seconds to tens of seconds before strong shaking. However, there will almost always be a late alert zone close to the epicenter where the alert simply cannot be received before strong shaking. You're just too close. We cannot get that out in time. There are also the inevitability of false and missed alerts. This is a fully automated system without any human oversight, and it uses just a heartbeat of data. It's not using the full wave train from the earthquake. It's using just a little bit of data from the P wave. So it's really tricky to get things right. Also, for the technical partners, there may be multiple earthquake early warning messages for a single event, especially if you have something like the Cascadian megathrust earthquake, which takes minutes to rupture. As more data is received, the information is reassessed, and if need be, more alerts will be sent out to provide more information to those technical partners. And then finally, this system will only be effective if people and systems take appropriate actions. So that is really key. Just a couple of examples. I mentioned a 1946 earthquake near the Courtenay-Comox region of Vancouver Island. Were this earthquake to happen again with an earthquake early warning system in place, Vancouver and Victoria would both get tens of seconds of warning. That is huge. That is an amazing ability to protect yourself. Nanaimo would get about 20 seconds. That's still a great amount of time. Unfortunately, Cumberland, where a friend of mine lives, that is within the late alert zone, and she will not have any warning before the strong shaking. Another example from Quebec, from an earthquake that happened in the Saguenay region. If that earthquake were to happen with an earthquake early warning system in place, Quebec City would get about a half a minute. Montreal, Ottawa, and Fredericton will get about a minute and a half warning. So the ability for the system to provide warning is really amazing, especially when you consider what those seismic waves can do. So in summary, this earthquake early warning system will provide up to tens of seconds of warning of strong shaking to at-risk communities. This can reduce the impact of the earthquake when people and systems take protective actions. The system became operational in British Columbia in May, and it will be launched in Ontario and Quebec this autumn. Finally, our next steps, we're going to be doing some beta testing with a few critical infrastructure operators that we've already been in contact with. We're going to be starting to engage with other critical infrastructure operators and other potential technology developers. We want to build that capacity within Canada to have these triggered automated systems. And then we will also be having a public advertising campaign in Ontario and Quebec, probably around the time of shakeout. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. That was a really, really great presentation and a great overview of the system that you have in Canada. I'm sure people will have some questions, but they might be still thinking about what they want to ask. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to jot down their questions and I'll help field those questions. But while people are still writing up, I do have probably just a question on, you mentioned the baseline survey. Have you launched that? And what's your kind of current feel of the baseline of people's knowledge of earthquake early warning?
Well, it was really interesting. I've got a student helping me with that right now. She's creating heat maps of the results because we held the survey in January, a little bit into February, because we're getting we got about over 2,000 responses, which isn't bad. And it was interesting to see people's level of preparedness. Generally speaking, the closer to the coast you are, the more likely you are to be prepared because, of course, you're in the high hazard area. But there's this little area, the greater Vancouver region, where people are hardly prepared at all. And I think it's that sort of urban mindset that people, if you're in the city, there's everything on your doorstep. People would come and help you. I don't have to worry about it. Whereas if you're in a more remote region, you realize you can be cut off from supplies and that sort of thing. So you're more likely to be prepared. I was really impressed when I went up to Haida Gwaii after the Haida Gwaii earthquake in 2012, how amazing those people were. They were really resilient because they have supplies shipped in, like by ferry, once a week. That ferry is often cut off because of bad weather and all sorts of things like that. So they could be low on fuel, low on food. So these people stockpile. They have a huge resilience. Also, they had a major earthquake in 1949. It was a magnitude 8.1, and it took down all but one chimney. So when you go up there, there are hardly any brick chimneys. Most people have metal chimneys because they realize this sort of risk. So it's interesting to see who is resilient and who isn't. And we're hoping that we can sort of build up the resilience in those areas, like target those areas with sort of awareness campaigns to help try and boost everyone up so that we have this resilient society.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I think that goes to show kind of that, with experience comes people's ability to prepare and respond to these things. And it's quite interesting that you have this baseline survey so that you can monitor later on as you deploy the earthquake early warning even further. So really keen to see what's happening in that space. So we have a few questions on the chat box, and I saw some people raise their hands earlier, and you can raise your hands if you have questions, and we can ask Alison a question. But I'll start with Roger's question. So he's asking, can we know a bit more about the redundancy in place to maintain data transmission after a large earthquake, so you can continue to warn for subsequent aftershock, which can be quite impactful?
Yes, it's tricky because often earthquakes damage things like cell towers and other infrastructure, and that can be a challenge. We are using also satellite communications. In fact, a lot of stations have two modes of communication, so hopefully if one's down, the other's working. So that's one way we're trying to do that in terms of data transmission. Also, we were talking with someone recently about using radio. So that might be another option in the future to add that to our systems. In terms of people receiving it, like the National Public Alerting System, we sort of have to rely on them. Like, someone I think mentioned WIA in the States. We're going to be doing some testing with them to see what their latencies are like, because right now, for severe weather and amber alerts, being 5 seconds late doesn't really make much of a difference. But if you're 5 seconds late with an earthquake early warning alert, that does make a difference. So we need to know that the systems can work, and often it comes down to the providers as well, the cell service. So we have been in contact with the cell companies. They are all boosting their systems because it seems like everyone's like we're now a cellular society. So that is improving. We do have concern for some of our more remote communities because they already have challenges with cell service and internet. The Strathcona Regional District, which is one of our extended network partners, they are putting in fiber optic cables to help boost connectivity into those communities. So we're hoping we can use that as well. We are using it for data transmission. And then, pardon me. Also, there are devices you can purchase which are radio transmitters for warnings. And I just met with someone on a couple of days ago about this. So that's another option for those communities. It's something like weather radio, so that they can still receive those alerts, even if they don't have cellular or cellular internet coverage.
Cool,
But it's
thanks.
a challenge. It is a
Yeah.
challenge.
It is a challenge, and especially, yeah, maybe you has already mentioned a little bit about the way from on cell broadcast, but another kind of follow up with from David. So can you comment on warning times, including system latency, communication latency, and the time to react? Obviously for cell broadcasts, in the US and also here in New Zealand, we have the similar system, an EMA system, a mobile alert system. So maybe a comment on the communication latency, the entire system, and yeah, maybe a little bit more on that, Alison. Thank
Well,
you.
for the system, I mean, well, as soon as the earthquake is detected on the force sensor, because we're requiring that force sensors detect it, otherwise you'd have a lot of false triggers. So once the seismic waves arrived at that fourth station, it takes very little time for the processing to occur and for the alert to get to the National Public Alerting System. A lot of the latencies is that the time for the seismic waves to make it to the fourth station, which is why we have a dense network to make sure that takes not much time. Of course, if it's far offshore, it does take some time to get there, but then again, the time between the P and the S wave is stretched out anyway, so that is okay, generally speaking. And then the time for the cell alert, yeah, it can vary. It's frustrating that way, but so far the testing looks okay. We've been doing a little testing internally with our own phones, and it seems to be working fine. So a few seconds.
Cool. Please, for the audience, please put in more questions in the chat box. But Alicia has her hand raised. Alicia, if you have a question. Sorry, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Alison, for your very informative presentation. I have two questions. It's all about kind of people-related stuff, I guess. The first one is, I still believe Canada is an immigration country and with lots of immigrants from different countries. And I was wondering, in terms of the education or the communication part of the earthquake early warning, and do you have some sort of plans how to reach out to different communities?
Yeah, we have been working with, for instance, Emergency Management Climate Readiness BC. They've incorporated earthquake early warning into their public education materials, like their earthquake and tsunami guide and other activities. And they have that guide not just in English and French, but in other languages, and simplified and traditional Chinese, in I think Tagalog and Punjabi. So they are trying to reach those immigrant communities. I've also worked with Canadian Red Cross on an inclusive resiliency project to help and boost people's awareness. People who are newcomers to Canada, we're one of the vulnerable populations. So we had a postal campaign where we sent little postcards with information to people, which would link to a multilingual website. And that targeted people who came to Canada within the last 5 years, who were in the high risk regions of Canada. So that was, I think, an exciting project to work on. And then also, anyone who visits the National Public Alerting System is a little different than some in that it doesn't require any registration or fee or anything like that. If you come from anywhere, well, Alicia, you visit us in BC and we have an earthquake, your phone will alert you because it is in that cellular area.
Oh, that sounds cool. Thank you. And my other question is, you touched on briefly about remote, which is kind of vulnerability groups. And what about other vulnerable groups, like probably people with physical inconvenience or other like learning disabilities and stuff like that? And do you have sort of plans how to reach out, how to educate them about the system and how to use them and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, at both Emergency Management and Climate Readiness BC and Shakeout BC have been working really hard to reach those kind of populations. We have a lot of information on our website, like if you are in a wheelchair, what to do in an earthquake, turning away from windows, locking your wheels, trying to cover your head and neck. I've spoken with the Association of Blind Canadians, talk about how they might respond, what they need to know. So we're trying to build up that awareness in those populations too.
Thanks, Alison, and really great to hear about the different kind of education and awareness and kind of reaching to different audiences for this system. So changing tack a little bit, we have two questions on the technical side. So I have two questions on algorithm. So what can you elaborate a little bit more on the type of algorithms you use for earthquake detection? And are you using Epic, Finder, both, or other algorithms for your system?
I believe we're using both. And you're doing both test and production mode in BC, and then test mode in the east of Canada, because we're not yet launched there, and we're still installing a few more stations before we do that. But yes, we're using the Shake Alert algorithms. We've just also funded a really interesting project with Tel Aviv University to investigate ways to process array data because we've got a lot of coastline in BC. So it's really tricky to instrument some of these rugged geographies, and you've got the coast or you've got a border. So we want to be able to have a small arrays in these sort of regions so that we can still effectively alert for the early warning system with the early warning system. So they've developed a couple of algorithms for us, and that they're being investigated by Shake Alert for incorporation into the Shake Alert system.
Yep, thank you. And kind of I guess a follow-up. What software do you use to analyze the earthquake event, like Seiscomp or kind of different software for analyzing this information? Is that something that you can share?
Well, the earthquake early warning course uses Shake Alert Epic and that sort of thing. But our regular routine processing, where we actually get a person to look at the waveforms, we're using Seiscomp.
Oh, awesome. And we have a question from Andre, and I'm just going to request Andre to maybe unmute yourself so that you can ask this question, but it's more towards whether this product can have an alternate version towards scenario creation. And maybe, Andre, if you can elaborate what you mean by this scenario creation. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, no, sorry, as long as I can figure out my camera. Yeah, no, what I'm very interested in this system, but my question, you flashed up a couple examples, and it must have been the test scenario. And what I'm curious about is has there been the consideration to utilize this system in a scenario-based kind of capacity? So for different municipalities or organizations to subscribe and utilize the function as a what if tool. So for Toronto or for Vancouver to actually utilize this and actually be able to implement a 5.0 or a 6.0, or to potentially actually dive into the Cascadia scenario with a 9.0 scenario, and just to see what the different levels are and how to potentially plan accordingly.
We could, and we have that is available. So like I showed that display tool, you could do it through that. But I'm gonna put in the chat. I was working on a risk assessment project, and we've actually created an even better tool called Risk Profiler. So people can go in and look at scenario earthquakes, and also just a probabilistic view of the seismic hazard in their region or the seismic risk in their region. And they can identify the high hazard areas, high risk areas, so that maybe focus their resilience efforts, their retrofitting on those buildings and neighborhoods. Also, there's a really cool, it has a scenario tool. You can also do this thing where you virtually retrofit the high risk buildings and then rerun the scenario and see what the cost benefit analysis is. So it's a really It's an amazing tool for community planners and emergency managers, for engineers, and it's relatively new. They're going to be adding other risks to it, as in addition to earthquakes. They're going to be adding wildfire and flooding in the coming years, probably more
And
than years, but
this is all within Profiler?
yeah. It
Okay.
doesn't include the earthquake early warning, but I mean, we have that ability to, with the display tool, this display package for the technical partners. But yeah, I mean, certainly we could add that to Risk Profiler probably in the future. It's a good idea.
Yeah, no, I was just considering because Risk Profiler has some amazing data.
Yes.
It's all building and critical infrastructure focus as well as the shaking, which is
Yep.
really beneficial. But I was thinking, yeah, I was just curious about the extrapolation of that to potentially farther off communities, and just playing around with some fault lines and some different scenarios. So it was more of a theoretical, but I was very curious.
Yeah, I was involved in that in the early days. So I did a lot of the fault rupture modeling, which was a lot of fun. But I I didn't get to rupture all the faults I wanted to before I moved over to the to the earthquake early warning system. But I felt a bit like a James Bond villain, like, ooh, what can I do now? But it was really great because you can it's sort of it can be sobering for people to see what can happen and maybe realize that earthquakes aren't just a thing that happened elsewhere to other people. They happen to our communities. They will happen to our communities. So we need to do something about it.
Yeah, and then thinking about the Alpine fault scenario as well as the Hikurangi fault, directly for New Zealand, I think it would be a really, really valuable tool to get involved with the AF8 Society. So yeah, no, just a curiosity, but thank you.
Yeah,
No, you're
thank
welcome. And
you.
we used OpenQuake for that, and then also a bit of oh, I've just had one of those seizure moments. Another risk modeling tool for because OpenQuake it doesn't deal with the linear infrastructure very well, like electrical
Okay.
lines and that sort of thing. So we had to address that separately. But yeah, it was a lot of work, but I think it's come up with a valuable tool for people. And it's just, this is an evergreen product. I mean, we're going to be adding to it and all that in the future.
Thank you,
Oh,
Andre and Alison, for sharing about the
thank you.
risk profiler. I think that's a really great tool, and looking at also, how can we integrate the earthquake early warning scenario and further. So, thanks for that conversation. We have another question from Uma, and this is on interoperability. So, could you tell us a little bit more about interoperability with Shake Alert, and what are kind of the reasons for you to go into kind of a collaboration partnership with USGS in this case, I guess, and yeah, maybe a little bit on the interoperability side of things.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Well, it made sense on so many levels to adopt the Shake Alert software package, and to work with USGS. I mean, we have worked with the USGS for decades, sharing our regular monitoring data with them and our ideas and doing research projects together. I mean, it's been a fantastic relationship. And the fact that they had developed this for Western United States, it made sense for it to extend up into British Columbia. We are actually they're looking into expanding into Alaska, and we are looking into expanding into Yukon. So the partnership could continue that way. It helps with that, as I said before, sharing the data. It makes it really easy to share data through between the networks, and we can benefit from their expertise, their experience, the fact that they have enormous capacity at the United States Geological Survey. As I said to you before this all started, they've got essentially an army of people working on earthquake early warning and all sorts of elements of that, education, technical engagement. I mean, for education and technical engagement, that's me in Canada. They have like I don't know, 24 people doing that in the States. They have a team of people who do social science to determine how people respond in different situations to different types of messages. We can just benefit from their capacity and from their experience and knowledge. And they've been extremely generous in sharing that with us, and also in sharing their resources and saying, take these, adapt them for Canada, do what you want. Don't worry about copyright. This is all okay. This is all open. And it's been fantastic working with them. They've been absolutely lovely people. Their technical support has been terrific. And the fact that this system was developed for the United States and it was effective during, the Ridgecrest sequence, it just made sense to adapt it for Canada and use it up here. And it's been a really very positive experience.
And that's really cool. And I think that's one thing unique because, you share borders with the US, and in New Zealand, we're kind of isolated on our own. Yeah, and in the past, kind of some of the scenarios that you showed that has happened in the past, like on the West Coast, we see that, a rupture could affect shaking in Seattle and so on. So with this system currently, like if there's a event that would happen, would that also trigger the shake alert system? Like would that warn the people in the Washington state and so on? Do you think that is already interoperable enough that the system will work? Yeah.
Well, the systems only work for their own countries. So what happens is it's interoperable in that we're sharing data and that sort of thing. But our system requires that at least one Canadian station be triggered. So we can get data from 3 or 4 or however many US stations, but until one of ours is triggered, we won't actually send out an alert because we want to know that at least one of our stations was triggered. But yes, I mean, if it's a large enough earthquake that it impacts both sides of the border, both regions will be alerted, but they will be alerted from each of their own countries' systems. The alerting stops at the border. Although that is a little tricky because I have to say that when I go for a walk along Beach Drive in Victoria, I do get an alert on my phone saying, "Welcome to the United States." I can see the United States, it's like across the water, but I'm not in the United States. So there's a chance that people right near the border might receive alerts from the other countries' system. But generally speaking, you should receive the alert from your own system.
Oh, that's quite interesting to put that example, because I guess with the cell broadcast, you're looking at more, like a geographical boundary for them to send alerts. So that can happen if you're really close to the border, and yeah, and maybe also a challenge for, I guess, some of the educational aspect when people are crossing over.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it is a challenge in that it's tricky because the way the National Public Alerting System works is it alerts by census subdivision. And BC has some crazy shaped census subdivisions. Like there's some that are really long and thin. So if part of that census subdivision has an MMI above 4, it will trigger the whole census subdivision to be alerted rather than just that part of it. And it's also the cell towers within it. So how those cell towers operate, sometimes they leak into neighboring subdivisions, so that can happen. But we're hoping that it's going to be a case that even if you weren't at that level of shaking, you will have at least, felt shaking and received an alert. So it shouldn't be too much of a, I got this at the wrong level of shaking, because people are not actually that good at determining what the level of shaking is, with the intensity.
Cool. Thanks, Alison. So I see that Giri has his hand raised. So Giri, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Alison. So first, I want to thank you for sharing a lot of information on the EEW. And the question I have is, so earlier you have mentioned that so these EEWs will protect a lot of lives by halting trains and diverting air traffics. So do we have any specific system that is in place stating that this the tracks have misalignment and misplacement? Because you did also mention that earlier there was an possibility of derailment which was prevented. So do we have any system? Because when it comes to railways, it's at a stage you will be getting hundreds of miles that are that only has tracks. So how do you ensure that this EEWs are linked to that from resuming the services?
Well, early warning system will, like we've been speaking with Canada Line, which is a SkyTrain system in Vancouver. They already
Okay.
have some technology in place which can move trains to a safe spot. And also it can automatically open the doors at stations so that people can egress more easily. So that's the sort of thing that our system will trigger. There are different systems in place for assessing the health of the tracks. We are not involved in that. That's structural health monitoring. I think BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure is mostly involved in that, but there are other organizations as well. And while we can provide, you saw that sort of grid map showing the intensity of
Yeah.
shaking,
Yeah.
but in the region, they can use that to determine whether it's likely that the track is damaged, and then
Okay.
target the areas where it's likely for inspection. But we don't actually determine whether the track is damaged or not.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, cool. I think that's quite interesting with your systems that you have good partnerships with different organizations who can be your technical partners and take I guess the information and warning that you have, and they can make decisions. And like you highlighted, this system, people have to, and systems have to take action for it to be effective. So I think that's really great to see that you have lots of technical partners. So we also have a question from Amal. So Amal, please.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you very much, Alison, sharing your system that you using in Canada. So my question somewhat relates to the question that Raj raised at the beginning, because my expertise, because I also collaborate with the CRISiSLab of the JCDR in this work, but my work mostly relate to broadcasting. So as you may know, the World Meteorological Organization and the other UN bodies committed by 2027 to have early warnings for all. And so we recently had floods few times, especially in Auckland, outer areas had floods few times, and we learned quite a lot from that about what's going to happen to, we knew this, but happened to the communication infrastructure. The fiber lines were washed off. It was replaced after a few months' time. With the next flood, it was washed off once again. Cell towers down. So the disaster management warning was to listen to the radio. So my question is, do you have in Canada these alerts going to broadcast systems, like going to the television, going to radio? Because the best examples are in Japan. They are very well connected, and you can have the receivers which could wake up. And yesterday I was attending one of the technical sessions. Now the Europeans are coming up with Jovent's alerting system for digital radio. So do you have these alerting systems already connected to broadcasting through Canadian radio and television? And how does it work?
Yeah, the Canadian system is through the National Public Alerting System, and they use the Alert Ready, and most people receive alerts through their smartphones because that's what people have on them. But it also alerts to radios and televisions. And you're right that the Japanese system is amazing. Almost anything that the Japanese do with respect to earthquakes is amazing. But their system has its own sound. It's a distinctive alert sound, and they use that for all of those modes of communication. The National Public Alerting System uses one alert sound for all types of alerts. So we do have to, part of our public education has to be that if you hear that sound, assume it's an earthquake, and then if you don't feel shaking, then you look at your phone to see what the alert is, because you don't want to assume it's an Amber Alert and ignore it. Because if people are inside their house, they're going to ignore an Amber Alert because they won't see the child or whatever. So it's tricky. I think, the public education piece is going to be a huge uphill battle. And a real challenge because we've got, 41 million people in Canada, over a broad region. It's the second largest country in the world. And in terms of the public education, I'm leading that, and I'm a team of one essentially. So that's why those collaborations come in handy with the provincial AMOs and the Public Safety Canada and the other advocates for awareness. So hopefully over time we will be building that.
Yeah, if I could quickly add, because there was another good example which came from Japan. Most of you would remember that great tsunami. So during that time, all the cell towers were washed off, and so there was no possibility at all for people to get communicated. And after that, they had a major campaign to reintroduce more frequency modulated or FM radio, so that the radio can be communicated well, because they generally at a high elevated places, and what they call high tower, high power. Yeah, so I think that this is kind of that this also requires some national policies to go hand in hand with those things. So thank you, Alison.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I think you're right. I mean, we have to find as many ways as possible to reach people. And I think, these FM receivers is a terrific way. I mean, if not just radios, but the little alert tools that can be triggered by those FM frequencies, because they reach further often than those cell towers do.
Thanks, Alison and Amal, for the question. And Alicia, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have more questions. So Alison, we talked about immigrants, and yesterday, because we were having similar conversations about, because as New Zealand, Canada also gets a lot of travelers, and travelers from all over the world. And is there some sort of plan that how to inform the travelers who have no idea? So for example, drop, cover, and hold are the sort of action for some countries, but not all over the world, because it depends on the building and related situation. Yeah, so we were discussing maybe we should also have this kind of information very straightforward to travelers who enter New Zealand. And yeah, just kind of raise this question.
Well, there's a two-pronged answer to that. One is that with the early warning system, most people learn about earthquake early warning when they receive the alert. They're not going to learn about it other ways. They're just, people are in their little tunnels. So the early warning alert tells them what to do. It says, earthquake detected, drop, cover, hold on, protect yourself. Very clear. In terms of travelers, Shakeout BC developed some materials for the tourism industry several years ago to help teach, first of all, the staff, because a lot of staff are from away. We've got a lot of staff from the prairies, from Australia, all over the world. They don't necessarily know that where they've come to is seismically active and how to respond to earthquakes. So there are materials on how to train your staff, so your staff can take care of themselves and help take care of the clients. And then we created some materials that they can put into like hotel rooms or restaurants, so the people can know that they're in earthquake country. This is what you do. This is how you respond. We've also worked with other organizations. Ucluelet, which is on the west coast of Vancouver Island, is a beautiful place, but you're looking at the subduction zone when you're sitting in your hotel room. So we worked with them. They created this wonderful little folding map that folds up, fits in your pocket. It's a beautiful little piece of tourism, because it shows the hiking trails around Ucluelet. Ucluelet has this amazing trail system, but it also shows you where the tsunami evacuation sites are. And then on the other side, it tells you a little bit of how earthquakes and tsunami and how to respond and how to be safe. And it's fantastic. I mean, it's one of these wonderful things. We also have a lot of, like the tsunami evacuation signs around the towns, and just that sort of trying to build that awareness in the communities.
Thanks, Alison. I just want to follow up with that question, because I guess in New Zealand, when there's a huge earthquake that happens, Well, if you have an earthquake early warning system, the immediate question a lot of people will ask is like, will there be a following tsunami? Because it's a, in a very coastal region.
Yeah.
So in your case, especially in the West Coast, is there like messaging in your earthquake early warning message about, potential tsunami, or where to look for information if this is a concern? Or is the system really more concentrated on warning about earthquakes, or is there kind of a follow-up, like, for more information, if you want to know more about tsunami and the risk following this earthquake, will there be some sort of information related? Is that something integrated?
It's not integrated into the earthquake early warning system. This is only an earthquake early warning system. It's not a tsunami warning system, although we will be sharing our earthquake, the seismic data with the tsunami warning center in Alaska. So the information from that, like the Earthquakes Canada website, whenever we have an earthquake where it is potentially tsunamigenic, we have a link to the National Tsunami Net, to tsunami.gov from the, for the Alaska and Pacific tsunami warning centers. So we provide the information that way. We try to be clear that this is not a tsunami warning system. We also try to be clear that tsunami warnings are fine they're really for those tsunamis that come from far away, from Japan or Alaska, or potentially New Zealand. Those are the tsunamis where you need the tsunami warning. You've got the time to give the warning, and people aren't going to feel the shaking, so they won't know to evacuate those outer coastal areas. We try to be clearer to people. If the shaking is more than a minute or it's difficult to stand, it could be tsunamigenic. Assume it is, get to high ground. The tsunami, the earthquake is your warning for tsunami.
Yeah.
It's really hard to drill that into people. And it's also, we try to give people a lot of information. I mean, when you look at the Sumatra earthquake, there was that the water went out first. That happens most of the time, that the water recedes. We're trying to tell people that is a sign that water's coming back, and it's coming back fast. Don't go down to look at the tidal pools. Move to high ground. Trying to get people to understand that the first wave is usually not the highest. It's often the second, third, or fourth wave. In Chile, it was the third wave. Like the first wave was only like 20 centimeters. The third wave was 2.4 meters. That's a huge difference. And too many people have been lost because they see the first wave come in, they want to go down to watch the next one, and the next one's bigger. So I think, there's like, unfortunately, that the education around tsunamis is still relatively fresh, and we've really got to build that in people's awareness. I mean, people now know if you get a fire on your clothing, stop, drop, and roll. I mean, everyone knows stop, drop, and roll now. We got to get that way with earthquakes and tsunamis.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Alison. And I think that's really good to hear that, when we have this system, we also have to communicate about the limitation. It is an earthquake early warning system. There's a separate system for tsunami, and, the different messaging and kind of these things. And that is, I guess, the part of the challenge and the education aspect when we're talking about different hazards. And these hazards can be related as well. But really, really great to hear from you, your experience, and you're a team of one, but you're doing amazing. And it's like and there's like lots of things happening with the Canadian system, and also really looking forward to what's going to happen as you roll out in the East Coast, and and really looking forward to know more about the different aspects of the work that's being done there. So I'll just, we're finally in the last minute of our webinar. So I'll just invite either Alicia or Raj to give a last few words. And really thank you, Alison, for being online and answering everyone's questions, and really being great at on this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Thank you so much, Alison. So on behalf of the CRISiSLab team, I know we discussed this some time back, just before you start deploying the system. So thank you so much joining us today and educating us with what you have been doing there, and your great work. So all the best with that, and hope you'll build your team, hopefully. And there are good scientists in this part of the world who knows, there might be people come and join your team as well over there. So best wishes, and looking forward to continue engaging with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you,
all,
everyone.
and see you next time. Stay
Thank
tuned
you
for your
the
questions.
recording.
Bye.
See you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Alison, very much.
Thank you.